Good evening. We want to welcome you to the first Wednesday preview show of the football season, and it is presented by the law offices of Robertson, Beasley, Shipley, and Robertson, PLCC. They have offices in Springdale, Fort Smith, and Ozark, and they're the oldest full-service law firm in the River Valley. And we are also presented to you by Bet Online. It is the fastest and easiest way to wager on all your favorite sports, contest events with first-to-market odds and lines. So head on over to Bet Online or use your mobile device today and make your first sports bet. Use our promo code BLEAV50 to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. And Bet Online is where the game starts. And with that, we will bring in our first guest via the Camelot Exteriors hotline and introduce Justin Williams, who covers the Cincinnati Bearcats for The Athletic. Justin, we want to thank you for jumping on. I know, week one, it's always a busy time for you, so appreciate your time.
No, I appreciate you having me on. I'm getting familiar. There's clearly quite a lot of Arkansas radio stations, podcasts, and I'm honored that you've asked me to be on tonight and talk to you guys about this game.
So with that, just the familiarity that we kind of talked about a little bit before we started recording is the interaction with the media, the fan base, because this is not every day you play Arkansas. So what was your initial reaction to, getting introduced to the fan base that is Arkansas Twitter and the social media aspect?
No, it's been fun for me. I have had to mute a couple tweet conversations that have just gone on a little too long that I have, no involvement in. But look, especially, covering from the Cincinnati perspective, seeing how this program has, grown the past 5 years. And then obviously what they got to last year, that's what the Cincinnati fan base has wanted. They've wanted games like that. They want fan bases like that. That's why the Cincinnati fans are so excited to go to the Big 12, where they feel like they have some kind of fan bases what they can interact with on this level. So, I think there's a lot interesting going on with the game. But for the build up and the lead up, especially these last couple of weeks, I think it's been great to kind of see both fan bases going at it a little bit.
Yeah, and talk about Cincinnati for a little bit, and the similarities between what we talked about, Arkansas and Cincinnati. Both had people coming after the coaches, Arkansas, the coordinators. Everybody thought that, Fickle was going to, take another job. It seems like that's the MO, mid-major or non-power 5 coaches, have success, and then some big school come and swoops them. So one, what did that say to the fan base and the program that he decided to stay? And just for the aspect of making that college football playoff, what did that do for the program? Finally, them letting a non-power 5 come to the big boy table.
Yeah, I think in terms of, Fickle staying around, that's been the biggest obstacle for Cincinnati football. You remember, we're going back 15 years now, but Mark D'Antonio, Brian Kelly, Butch Jones, that run there, they had a lot of success. They were, 1 second away from maybe going to the national championship game. I think, 2008 with Brian Kelly. They went to back-to-back BCS bowls. The problem was every time they would start to build that up, it was a stepping stone school. Those guys would go to the bigger school, bigger program, bigger paycheck. And that's even when Cincinnati was in the Big East. So that was always, for Cincinnati football fans, it was always like, man, they always felt if they could get someone to stay, they felt like there was a lot of resources with the program, a foundation, being in a bigger city and being in a good recruiting area. then Luke Fickell comes along and he like takes that to the extreme. I think when people were talking about this, they weren't thinking like, oh, we can go to the college football playoff or whatever iteration that would be. They were thinking like we can have success if we have a coach who buys into the culture here, who kind of makes it his own and then sticks around. Luke Fickell did that, and then he just goes above and beyond. And so I think part of it is Cincinnati as a football program always had some potential. And then you just have to credit what Luke Fickell has done from a coaching standpoint, from a culture standpoint. He's fit so well. He's understood exactly how to win in this area at this school. And then you look at kind of the way he's developed guys to be able to take a group of 5 team, to the college football playoff, and did it, with talent and with development. They had 9 guys drafted in the NFL draft this past year. Like, so it wasn't some gimmick thing. It wasn't them catching anybody by surprise that go on the road and beat Notre Dame. I don't know if even in Cincinnati football fans' wildest dreams 10 years ago, they were thinking that was possible. And, that's something Luke Fickell has made a reality. And now you have the Big 12 next year. And even with the way conference realignment is shifting things, I think this Cincinnati fan base is really optimistic about the future, and they should be.
Yeah, because for me, I'm 40. So when I think about the term Cincinnati, I think of Kenyon Martin and the basketball team, Huggins, just that run that they had back in the day. So now it's good to see that one, they did make it, and for me, I'm a college football fan, so it was really nice to see that he didn't just have success at Cincinnati and then just run off to the bigger, because you see that happen so many times, and I think that's what's happened. We don't want the parity in college football, but yet it seems like every time there's an up and coming team in college football, it doesn't last because they're always going to those big time schools. So it was really refreshing. And also you really get to know Luke Fickell because, again, when we were talking about before we went on air, there was a tweet that he kind of put out, or it was a tweet about a comment about him. He was going off of what Sam Pittman said about not having any friends, and he doesn't really get in. So I didn't know if it was kind of a jab at Pittman, or if he's just, trying to make a point in his own way. So if you could elaborate on, give our fans a little insight on his personality.
Yeah. So what Pittman had that great quote about, like, you don't know if someone's going to be bringing tea to a party or liquor,
yeah.
Which that it was good. And so Luke always does his weekly press conference on Tuesday. So we were fortunate enough to be able to see that from Pittman and then ask him about it. And so the question was, what would you bring to the party, tea or liquor? Not really going off of what Sam was saying, more just kind of playing on the quote. And Fickell was like, well, I don't have any friends, so I don't get invited to parties, that's just Luke Fickell. Like, we want him to, lean in and give us that like catchy, bitey news clip that goes off of this thing, and he's just like, no, I'm not even going to play that game. I'm gonna evade it and give you a smart answer, but not the one you want. So yeah, it certainly wasn't a jab at Arkansas or Sam Pittman. It was more of a jab at the media, saying like, I know what you guys want from me, and I'm not going to give it to you.
You're throwing that spinnerbait out there, and I'm not taking
That's right.
That also shows his humbleness of like, hey, look, I know what we did last year, but I know we need to do it again to be really taken seriously, because of course, everybody, this game, we'll jump into the game, both programs are coming in with something to prove this year. They're proving, with Arkansas side that, 9-4 season in the FCC, you've got to do it again. I mean, you don't have that, the schedule is just as tough, if not tougher, as last year. Cincinnati, they got to the big boy table, got to the college football playoff. Now they have to prove, hey, we got to do this again, because you don't want to be that flash in the pan. So it really sets up for one of the most, I think, yes, they voted it like the 5th or 6th game this weekend. I think they're really underrating this matchup, not just because it's a top 25, but you got 2 teams coming in to Saturday with a lot to prove. And that's something that that's hard to find in week 1.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you. It's we'll see how it goes. I'm kind of the mind that, like, I think no matter what happens in this game, it won't necessarily have a bearing on how good these teams are the rest of the season, but I think it'll probably have a big bearing on the outside perception of these teams. If Cincinnati comes in and gets a win, then yeah, it's right back to, wow, this team really has some staying power. They didn't just go to the playoff with those guys and then lose them all to the NFL. And Arkansas, look, they're trying to be a player in the SEC, and I mean, they have a brutal schedule this year. I'm sure you guys have talked plenty about that, but if you can really, it seems like it could go one of two ways, no matter how good they are, because of some of the quality of teams they're playing, non-conference and in conference. And to get a top 25 win over Cincinnati week 1 would just be a real good kind of momentum jumpstart for them.
So when you look at this year's team, Cincinnati, losing all that talent to the NFL draft, which side of the ball are you most concerned about if Cincinnati was to come away with the win, which I'm sure there's a lot of people on the Cincinnati side that think they have a legitimate shot at Arkansas. I mean, but from your perspective, where do you think the biggest question is coming into this game?
I mean, I think it has to be Cincinnati's secondary. And, they had Sauce Gardner, top 5 NFL pick. Kobe Bryant wins the Jim Thorpe Award. Brian Cook, safety, was a second-round pick by the Chiefs in the NFL draft. I've said this a bunch so far this offseason. No matter how good Cincinnati's secondary is this year, it's not going to be as good as last year. Like, they have an impossible standard to live up to. The question is, how good are they? Because even, Alabama had success running the ball in the Cotton Bowl, but even they didn't really try and test Cincinnati's secondary. Now, they didn't necessarily have to either. They got a little bit of a lead. They're able to kind of just run the ball and hold on to it. But we've seen the past 2-3 years, teams just not throwing at Sauce Gardner at all. And really, when they get behind, they just don't have a way to catch up because of how good that secondary has been. So I know Arkansas is a really good running team, but part of me wonders, like, are they going to come in and say, all right, here's, a couple of guys in the secondary have never started. Before we start running the ball and trying to establish that, let's see how good they are. Let's see if they can handle this stage. And I think that's going to be a question Arkansas week 1 and moving forward for Cincinnati is, how good is the secondary? Yeah, they're not going to be as good as last year, but can they even, can they get close to that? Will it be something they have to manage all year? Will it be a weak point? I don't even know if it's a concern as much as just almost a complete unknown for Cincinnati fans, and honestly, probably for teams that are going against them.
Yeah, and another big question, with this time of year in the South, I don't know how much, experience Cincinnati has playing in the South this early in, you're playing at 2:30, the kickoff and the environment. And of course, with the first game, SEC Network's going to be there, the fans are going to be there, the students. But how do you think they've been trying to prepare the best they can for the humid, even if it's not hot, it gets really humid down here. So what's the team been doing to really condition themselves to really, this is going to be a battle. This is not going to be a game where you're playing a Big 12 opponent where they're going to throw it around. They're going to try to, Arkansas is going to try to set the tone running the ball. So how do you think they've really handled that?
Yeah, from a weather standpoint, the humidity in summers in Cincinnati are not what they are in Fayetteville in the South, but they're not very pleasant either. So I don't think there's a huge worry. That it's actually, Cincinnati's a pretty deep team. I think they're gonna, roll in some different guys when they can to try and worry about that. I think the bigger, thing to watch will be for those guys who are returning, who played a lot last year. Like, there isn't a stage they haven't been on. They played on the road at Notre Dame. They played against Alabama in the Cotton Bowl. They played against Georgia in the Peach Bowl the year before. But for those guys that didn't start, who are new first-time starters, what do you do on 3rd and 8 when the crowd's going crazy and you got to keep your head about you? What do you do, on a big play when you got to have tight coverage and you've never been in that kind of a situation before? So I must think, and Fickle's even talked a little bit about this, I think it's more like the human element and emotion of those guys who haven't been on the stage. Some of them have, some of them, nothing that you throw at them is going to shake them because they've been there before. But there's a handful of them that even if they were on the sideline for the Cotton Bowl, they weren't out there, in the moment when it was a big play. How are they going to handle it? Because it's probably going to happen, in a packed stadium against a top 25 team on Saturday.
And, we talked about the defense and the big question. We'll move over to the offensive side. And this is something when we had Chad Brindle on a couple of weeks ago, we even failed to even mention. And, we talk about Arkansas's run game and KJ Jefferson and the stable of running backs. But, what does Cincinnati have in the run game that can complement the passing game and kind of give us some insight on who we need to look out for and really keep an eye on Saturday?
Yeah, that's another one. The two biggest unknowns with this team are secondary and running back. So there's one on each side of the ball. They certainly have strengths and things that they feel really comfortable with, but running back, they lost Jerome Ford to the NFL, who was great for them last year, tied the all-time record, program record for single season touchdowns. they have guys they like in that backfield, but again, it's another thing of they haven't really had to do it. They have a couple seniors who are going to play, who have kind of been like backup role guys in the past, and then they have two young guys. One, Arkansas fans might recognize Corey Kiner, who was at LSU last year. He's a big time recruit coming out of Cincinnati, Mr. Ohio football. Bearcats finished a close second, to get him coming out of high school, big time 4-star recruit. And he decided to go to LSU. He was there for a year last year, played a little bit, had some good moments, and then ended up transferring back home this offseason with the coaching change and everything going on down there. But he showed up after spring ball. He really just had preseason. And so you kind of wonder, has he had enough time to totally grasp everything? Do they trust him enough, to throw him in there? He's super talented and obviously understands what it means to play in the SEC, but are they going to trust him to run the ball 12 to 15 times or something like that week one right out of the gate? I don't know. And the other guy is Miles Montgomery, who's a Florida kid, another second-year player they really like, but they didn't need him at all last year. So, those are two guys who I think, long-term they feel really good about, and maybe even this year could break out. But again, week one on the road, top 25, crazy environment. Are they going to trust them to put them in those situations, and how do they handle it if they do?
Yeah. And you touched on, the portal and that's the next point I wanted to bring up with the transfer portal and, the big NIL stuff that's been going on. We always talk about the Alabamas, the Ohio States, Clemson's, USC's, of course, OU's, but Arkansas has really benefited from the transfer portal, especially what we've got coming back this year from the transfer portal in the NIL money. So what has that done to really, for a program like Cincinnati, who you don't have the depth as an SEC school or a Big Ten school? How is that really kind of, in your eyes, kind of leveled the playing field a little bit? And of course, with the NIL stuff, you've got a program like Cincinnati, and where you might have some boosters that can offer some kids some little bit extra money to come play there. So how have you seen that help a program like Cincinnati, especially coming off a year last year losing that, and then you now have a chance to reload because of the two advantages we all have?
Yeah, the portal's been interesting for Cincinnati. Luke Fickell is definitely, he's gone cautiously into the portal. He's not one of those guys who I want to remake the roster every year by pulling guys out of the portal. He still kind of believes in the core of us has to be recruiting and then developing those guys. And they've tried to basically use the portal to plug holes. Jerome Ford's a good example. They brought him in from Alabama. He kind of was like a backup for 1 year behind their starter, and then last year explodes, has a great season. And they've done done that with a couple of guys this year. Corey Kiner, he's a little bit of a special example, and they've had some other instances of this, is maybe guys who go to Ohio State or Notre Dame or somewhere from the Cincinnati area, and then they have a chance to bring him back home. They got Noah Potter, who's another Ohio guy. He went to Ohio State for a couple of years. They got him in the transfer portal. The one thing that you really have to credit Luke Fickell for, though, is they haven't lost guys. You look at some of these other group of 5 teams, and if you're Sauce Gardner or Desmond Ridder or, whoever, those are the guys who are then getting poached, more often than not from some of these Power 5 schools. And because of the success Cincinnati's had and because of the way they've developed them and the culture Luke Fickell's created, they really haven't lost like any significant important guys. The guys they've lost have been, guys who felt like they weren't playing enough at Cincinnati as opposed to I want to take a step up. So you have to definitely credit them, I think, on the way that they've used the portal, and so far it's that kind of approach has worked out for them. The NIL thing is interesting. Cincinnati, it's a big city, so there's competition with professional teams, but there's also a lot more businesses and companies, here in Cincinnati. So they've had opportunities to do stuff with Kroger, which is based in Cincinnati, a big supermarket chain, Skyline Chili, which everyone outside of Cincinnati is, abhorred by, and I totally understand, but, they've done stuff with them. So there is like that kind of booster element, but then there's also like, all right, there's some, commercial opportunities here in Cincinnati because it is a little bit of a bigger city. And so far that, I think they've done a good job of, this is another Luke Fickell thing. Like the guys who, have really earned it. Desmond Ridder got a bunch of NIL money last year. Sauce Gardner got a bunch of NIL money. They haven't totally waded into the, like, how do we get the 4- and 5-star recruits to come here? Maybe with NIL opportunities just yet, but I think they've done a good job of rewarding the guys who have played well, or, marketing them to an extent where they can be rewarded on the NIL marketplace. And so I think that'll be something as they move into the Big 12. how do they navigate the NIL, and maybe from a recruiting standpoint will be interesting to see, because it's one thing that so far Luke Fickell has, he hasn't necessarily wanted to talk a lot about publicly. So it'll be something worth watching.
Yeah, and that's funny. You talk about that. The ones that have been really open about it have been the big guys like Jimbo, Saban, Dabo, and I've said,
Ryan Day.
You see behind me. I mean, I've said it myself. It's kind of hard for me to sit there and listen to somebody who's made 9 million, 10 million a year off your quarterbacks. You look at what Deshaun Watson, Trevor Lawrence did for Dabo. You look at what Jameis Winston did for Jimbo. So it's kind of hard for me to really take it, and not laugh at them. Like, you're just going to sit there and complain about these kids making money when they have, in fact, with Jimbo, gave you 75 million guaranteed. So, I mean, it's funny. And I laugh at my own coach about you had two all-star, once in a generational quarterbacks come through. Now you're living large on, Lake Hartwell in South Carolina, but you don't want nobody to make money. So, but it is what it is. That's a whole nother conversation. But, now coming to the Arkansas side, you're starting week one probably with, I haven't really dove into your schedule yet, but a team that has really got a lot coming back when it comes to your core players on offense, defense with Catalon, KJ Jefferson. You got your running back core, coming back with Rocket Sanders. So when you look at Arkansas's offense, what is going to be the biggest key for you that you think that where Cincinnati has a chance to slow them down? And what do you see like the weaknesses of where it's going to be really hard to contain? And does Arkansas's questions at wide receiver really kind of even out your concerns at the secondary position?
Yeah, I mean, I think the assumption among everyone, probably Cincinnati fans and Arkansas fans, is that they're going to put on the Cotton Bowl tape and say Alabama was really able to, gain some yards, push them around a little bit by running the ball. And, Arkansas is not Alabama, but Arkansas is, closer than pretty much anyone else Cincinnati played other than Notre Dame last year. And so I think they might try to say, Cincinnati's played with a 3-man front a lot the past couple of years. Are they going to say, hey, if you're going to line up in a 3-man front, we're going to try and run it with our big quarterback and a really good running game, like you mentioned. But then the other side of it too is Arkansas tempted at all, like you said, like, all right, there's, it's not Sauce Gardner and Kobe Bryant. Should we try and go after some of these guys, even if we have questions at wide receiver? So I think Sam Pittman's the one that said that those first two series on either side of the ball are going to be interesting. I'm really curious to see how Arkansas attacks Cincinnati and then how Cincinnati reacts. Do they come out in a 3-man front, or do they have to switch to maybe more of a 4-man front because Arkansas is running the ball? I think they're probably thinking the same thing. We're going to come out and see what they do the first couple series, try and hold them at bay, not let them just get a quick strike touchdown on us. But then we're going to have to see how we adjust to them, because I think Cincinnati's strengths are in their front, basically what they would be a front six, their defensive line and their linebackers. But again, how do they shift that around based on what Arkansas does? I think will be really interesting.
Well, and knowing Kendall Browse, he's really known for throwing in some wrinkle plays, some try to, double reverse pass or something. So I know they've probably looked at that, as well as not only are they going to try to do the deep shot, but are they going to try to throw some kind of wrinkle play in there to catch us off guard? But I remember, I think it was Charlie Weiss for Notre Dame. He had a 15-play playbook, and it was a scripted, and I don't know, how many other coaches do that, but it's like they use that to gauge where their team's at, their opponent, and then they open up the playbook. And I don't know if that's something similar to what Cincinnati tries to do, but, especially with a guy like Browse, that up-and-coming offensive coordinator who really wants to stretch things out, make it balanced, how is that really, we look at your linebacker core in your front line, are they really, with what they got coming back? I mean, is that something that it's going to be difficult, especially when you're dealing with a true running dual threat quarterback?
Yeah, I mean, we asked about KJ Jefferson, Luke Fickell, on Tuesday, and he kind of joked like it's the same thing as the environment. You can pump in crowd noise and all that kind of stuff, but it's doesn't compare to the emotions when you're actually out on the game. And we were saying the same thing. Like, do you stick like a linebacker back there at quarterback on the scout team to kind of like, replicate what KJ Jefferson is? And he said the same thing. Like, you can put some big bodied guy back there, but it doesn't replicate trying to tackle that, guy in the middle of a big time game on Saturday. So they're definitely, aware of him and concerned of him and what he can do. And that's why I am interested to see how, Arkansas attacks them, because I think they're very confident in what they have up front. Just they know it, and I think they feel the strength of their defenses in the defensive line linebackers. But does Arkansas get them out of what they do? Do they make them go more 4 down, or how are they impacting where the safeties? Are they having to come into the box? Are they making them cover? All kinds of that stuff. So I think it'll be really interesting, what Arkansas does in that area, while all along, those defenders, linebackers, defensive linemen, whoever, are thinking, if this guy's 6'4", 250-pound dude is running at me, I'm going to have to tackle him. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see how they, I can't think of anyone they've really played at the quarterback position like KJ Jefferson. I'm sure that's the case for most teams right now.
Yeah. And another thing that, a lot of people don't touch on is we're talking about, how teams adjust to players coming in from the portal. Now, with a team like Cincinnati, not only are you having to prepare against, a guy like KJ Jefferson, you've got a full season to tape on him. Well, now you got Hazelwood, you got Sanders, you got all these guys that come from other teams that are going to be big impacts on Arkansas. How difficult do you think that is to prepare for when it is such a big game, when there's not really anything to gauge off of other than when they played for another team?
Yeah, my guess is it's probably, it's a lot less individual scouting and more what the offense is like. And that's a little bit easier when it is the quarterback. When it's a new quarterback, things can go different ways. But, they have gone against some Briles offenses, or, variations of it. And so my guess is they're looking at what Arkansas did. They looked at what they've done against those teams. And then they're just reminding these guys, like, okay, yeah, we're probably breaking down Oklahoma tape of what he did last year, the wide receiver, when he was there, and trying to figure out. And then what the other guy went from LSU to Toledo. What was that? What was his route?
Oh, I can't even remember. I'm telling you, when it comes to these if it's multiple schools, like the guy that went to USC and OU. I mean, he went to and then Florida back to USC. I can't remember what his name was, but yeah, it's hard to, and just seeing how it's a big land rush. I think all this stuff's going to die down especially when you look at USC's deal, when they start seeing these broken promises, or a guy goes to a school and expects a lot of big money. He doesn't play as much. Now the NILs are pulling out, how all this is going to play out. It's crazy when you see 1,500 names in the portal, knowing how many slots are there. It's just like, what are these people thinking? And I'm just thinking, who are you talking to? Because it's almost like the big guys know I can go anywhere and play. It's those ones that are on the fence that are like, man, just stick it out, or go to a smaller school where you can get some NIL money and maybe work your way up the depth chart and get to the NFL. Because we look at Mike Woods, that was at Arkansas, went to OU. Now he's on the 53-man roster. So, but we'll get you out of here on this. I don't know how you are on superstitions or predictions, but if you would give a prediction, if you don't want to, that's fine. Do it like they do it on college football game day and be like, well, you can't make a prediction, but what is your biggest key of Cincinnati winning the game against Arkansas?
I do think it's stopping the run, whatever that looks like. And again, I think it'll be really interesting to see how Cincinnati does it from a defensive front, and how they stack the box. And, I think if Arkansas can go and just kind of get 4 or 5 yards a pop, the way Alabama did, that's obviously going to be a huge problem for Cincinnati. So if that happens early, how do they counter that? If they can kind of keep the run at bay, I do think they have enough on offense where they can kind of keep pace, just in general this season. So, but again, if Arkansas is stringing together long drives and just really, really pounding it, I think that's going to be tough. Prediction wise, I'm terrible about doing scores, but just earlier this week in something I wrote, my prediction for the season was they lose to Arkansas in the opener, and then I think for the first time in 2 years, I don't know where, at some point they're going to lose a conference game, and I just think that's the way this season has gone. it'll tell you fans were like freaking out about that, like, oh, they're not going to lose a conference game. Come on, it's like, all right, this is the way the real world works. But I still think they have a chance to win the AAC. And honestly, the way that's gone the past few years, if you win the AAC, you get that G5 New Year's 6 Access Bowl. And so I think it would really speak well to Cincinnati as a program if after where they went last year and the year before and then all they lost, if they can get back to a conference championship and a New Year's 6 bowl, that's really says a lot about them. But I just think there's so many unknowns and variables. You're going on the road against a talented Arkansas team. I don't think it's impossible for Cincinnati to win. I think you're asking a lot of a team that is plugging a lot of holes, has a lot of new faces to win that game.
Well, Justin, again, man, I really appreciate you coming on. I know, like I said, if everybody's been grabbing you to come on their shows and really getting to, show yourself, to the Arkansas media and the fan base. So again, appreciate you being our first guest of our new Wednesday show, and best of luck to Cincinnati this weekend and the rest of the season.
I really appreciate having me on. I'm really looking forward to getting to Fayetteville and watching what I think should be a really good game. Yeah, there's a lot of good food there. So, I know people's probably going to be in the comments. I'm telling you, if you want anything to eat, you just put a tweet out, hey, Fayetteville coming to town. Where's the best spots? You'll have breakfast, lunch, and dinner lined up. It was before I go, I'll leave you real quick. And one of the things I wrote early on, there was like an Arkansas fan who, he did it in a good spirits, but was, a little good-natured trash talking, a long response on a comment. And I just responded, hey, that's fine. You got to tell me where to eat. And then a double long comment of him coming back with great, food recommendations. Oh, yes. So the people of Fayetteville are already good people in my book. Oh, yeah. Well, that's the thing. We could talk about sports and get no comments, but you mentioned food, drink, where's the best place to hang out? Like you said, you'll have to turn your comments off. But yeah, have a safe trip to Fayetteville and enjoy. SEC Network's going to be there. But that will do it for our first Wednesday preview. Again, we're going to come to you live every Wednesday at 8:30, brought to you by the law offices of Robertson, Shipley, Beasley, and Robertson, having a guest from each opposing team. And that will do it. We'll catch you next week.